former minister and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Franson, is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Tonight's episode, Building a Caring Society, with Krish Kandiah.
Everyone, it's Wade Franson. It's Created in the Image of God, the Role of Religion in Society. I'm here today with Krish Kandiah, who recently received the Order of the British Empire from King Charles III in Great Britain for his work. We're going to talk about hospitality as a spiritual practice. We're going to learn about where the impetus came from Krish Kandiah to do this kind of work and what led to him being able to accomplish so much in the name of good with a spiritual heart. Welcome to the studio, Krish.
Thanks, Wade. Lovely to be with you.
Well, it's my pleasure and my honor, and I'm so glad that we were able to arrange this this meeting. So, Krish, we always like to enable our guests to get to know you at a deeper level by looking back into your origin story. How were you created, right? And it's always a mix of nature and nurture. So tell us just briefly about your parents, who they were, and the world you were born into and the forces that shaped you in those very early years.
This is a really important question for me because looking back, my family's story really has shaped everything we've been doing since I became a Christian and since I became a charity leader. My family history is quite complicated. My mother was born in India. My father was born in Malaysia. My father's father was born in Sri Lanka. And my mother's father was born in Ireland. So, you know, it's very complicated to know who to cheer for in the Olympics because of the different varieties in my family. But my mother, because she was born into this mixed race family, she had a white father and a brown mother. When my grandfather went to fight against the Nazis in El Alamein, North Africa, he died, and he died a heroic death. He was given a medal by the Queen posthumously. He was providing covering fire for his troops, got them all out, but no one provided covering fire for him, so he died. There's a grave in the desert celebrating his valor. But because my mother was not brown enough for the white family and not white enough for the white family, she was put into an orphanage. And you might not know this, Wade, but about 5.1 million children around the world are in orphanages. And most of those children have a living parent, at least one. Most of them have two. It's normally poverty or other stigma that leads to those children being in an orphanage. And so my mum had a really tough time growing up in an orphanage, separated from her two sisters and her mother. And it was a grand aunt in Britain that heard about my mother's plight, brought her and her sisters, reunited the family together in Brighton on the south coast. And my mother's a teenager at this stage and decides she wants to give something back to the society that had welcomed her. So she trains to be a nurse. And she used to walk up the hill to the hospital where she was training, and people used to throw insults at her. Sometimes they'd throw a banana at her. They told her to go back home to the jungle that she was raised in. And my mother was just, you know, such an incredibly strong and courageous woman. She decided to fight back against the racism. And what she would do was on a Friday night, she would open her home and she would cook up a massive vat of curry and rice. And anyone who felt like they didn't fit in found welcome around my mother's table. And that was international students, that was other international nurses, that was just people that just felt somehow marginalized. And one of the people that came to that dinner, that regular dinner, was a young, dashing Malaysian student who should have been studying civil engineering, but ended up studying my mother. And they got married and starting having babies, and here's me and my sister in the world. But that idea that you fight hostility with hospitality, that became really an origin story for the work that we're doing, that even predates me becoming a follower of Jesus.
Wow. That's such a wonderful, heartwarming story, even though it is filled with tragedy. and heartwarming because of the approach and the action that your mother took. And I can so relate to it. My audience knows that I was actually also in an orphanage. It was a temporary orphanage. And yes, both my parents were living. It's a long story. Share it very briefly here with you. Our circumstances are so similar. My nothing to do with race, but the rest of it, right? So my parents divorced because my mother was from Canada, my father was from Sweden. We were living in the US.
Yeah.
He managed to smuggle me and my two sisters out of the country to Sweden, where the Swedish courts granted him custody. And then a 2.5-year court battle ensued, in which I was separated from both parents and my siblings for 2 of those years. The Supreme Court eventually awarded custody back to my mother. When we returned to the US, or with her, she was so drunk that she couldn't get down the stairs to the tarmac because she was an alcoholic and her new marriage was a sham, some guy she met in a bar. But she managed to fool the courts into believing that we would have a better 2-parent home with her. So shortly thereafter, we became wards of the state. And that's when the orphanage period started. But similarly to you, it was evoked that during the time when I was in Sweden, I remember the Olympics, right? You talked about who to cheer for, right? And it was the Soviet Union versus Canada versus Sweden in hockey, right? But this was the great societal question about the type of society we would live in. Yes. Of course, Sweden being the humanitarian superpower of its day in the late 60s, early 70s, right? The symbol of neutrality and goodness. All around the world, they were doing projects, and so we could be very proud of Sweden's humanitarian approach. But that led to the societal level of these questions, right? Which is one of the reasons. Not to make this about me at all, but I'm so fascinated with your story and how you've approached this and what your mother did in those early years. So obviously then that significantly influenced you in your approach. So tell us then about, how you then came of age, and when did the emerging consciousness of those early childhood experiences turn into action for you? What was the impetus for you because not every child goes the way of their parents.
You're right. And, my mother was a nurse. That was her profession. I didn't go into medicine. I originally thought I was going to be a cross-cultural missionary in the Soviet Union, in Russia. Wow. I was studying Russian in my spare time.
Хорошо. Я тоже.
Очень хорошо. So the plan was I was going to study chemistry, and I was going to be a kind of world-beating chemist. That was the idea when I was a teenager, and I'd be a chemist by day and a missionary by night. And I was excited that the Berlin Wall came down just before I went to university, but it meant that I didn't really need the chemistry to be able to go and serve. But I did my chemistry degree, and I actually learned a lot about logic and reason and evidence, and that's always stood me in good stead. But after the university, my wife and I, we met at uni. We ended up as being cross-cultural missionaries working with university students in Albania. And this idea in the back of our head that we would work to welcome others was always there. We remember walking in the night through Skanderbeg Square in Tirana. It's a beautiful part of the city, and we saw a little baby that was wrapped like in swaddling clothes, like you imagine Jesus was in the manger, and there was no one around, but people were leaving money on this baby. And my wife went to pick the baby up, and suddenly the handler comes out from around the corner, and this was bait. This was a way that people who are down on the luck raised money through people's compassion towards this seemingly abandoned child. And we looked to see what we could do to help there, and we couldn't. And then we ended up being evacuated from Albania. There was a terrible crisis in the country. And when we had left Albania, we started to have a family, and God blessed us with 3 children in 3 years. And then my wife said, you know what, I think we've still got capacity to care for some other children. And I'm like, I think we've already contributed to global population growth. We not sure we need any more children in our life. And she said, well, what about children that don't have families? And I said to myself, this is a great idea for other people. I had this vision at the end of my children's childhood, that they would all they'd come into our household together. Maybe they would all leave together. You know, they'd all go to work or university, and then it would just be my wife and I, like the good old days. We'll go on long romantic walks on the beach like we used to. I mean, we lived in the middle of the country. It was like a 200-mile journey to the beach, but we could commute to the beach. That would be fine. Or we heard about those couples that like to do city breaks in Europe. People go for a city break to Copenhagen or Paris. And none of that sounded any fun with small children and, you know, diapers and scooters. And so my wife was ruining my dream. And then 3 things happened in close succession. One was some friends of ours in their 60s became foster parents to teenagers, and that really challenged me. If they were willing to do that in their 60s, maybe we should think about doing it in our 30s. The second thing was I became really aware of the statistics around children in the care system, that children that age out of care, normally at 18, are very likely to become homeless or criminalized or exploited. And homelessness and people trafficking and sexual exploitation, those are all things I cared passionately about. And yet we could help children further upstream. We didn't have to wait for the system to chew people up and spit them out before we helped them. We could help them when they were 3 or 4 years old. And the final thing, and this is ridiculous, because I had a PhD in theology at this moment. God spoke to me through the Bible. It's an occupational hazard that happens to followers of Jesus, but he spoke to me through the Bible.
Pure and let me guess, pure and undefiled religion.
Yeah, James 1:27. But I didn't realize this James 1:27 isn't a one-off verse, right?
Right.
I mean, a lot of people look at James 1 and you go, okay, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and blameless is to care for widows and orphans in their distress. You couldn't put it more clearly that the priority that God is looking for in his people's worship, strangely, isn't rocking up at church or reading the Bible or praying or singing or even giving 10% of your wealth. Even those are really important things. The priority, the top of the list, is to care for the vulnerable. But that's, some people go, oh, I don't like the letter to the James. Martin Luther said it was an epistle of straw.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And so okay, let's cut James out. We go, what do you do with Matthew 25? The parable of the sheep and the goats. That Jesus was
one of my favorite passages. Yes, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, he will judge the nations. Yes. How will he judge them?
Yes.
Why?
I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was a stranger. And you go, hang on, Jesus is saying that somehow our salvation is connected to how we treat the vulnerable. Now, I'm pretty straight down the line Bible-believing Christian, and I know there's nothing I can do to warrant being acceptable to God, right? That I have sinned, I have failed. There's nothing I could do. And if there was something I could do to earn being into God's family, then Jesus didn't need to die on the cross, right? So I know that I'm only saved by grace. But interestingly, in Matthew 25, it's the indicator that I've received grace is that I'm passing that grace on to other people, and that theme comes up a lot. Like, take the Lord's
Amen.
Prayer, right?
Well, and we were just this Sunday in an assisted living facility where we meet every Sunday morning with a group of older folks, because on both ends of the spectrum, the vulnerable, right? And we were talking about love. And Saturday night we had a meeting in our home talking about justice, right? Yeah. And we were talking about how John says over and over again, if you don't love your brother whom you see, then that is proof that you don't love God whom you have not seen, right?
That's right. I mean,
so
you
have to put these things into practice, right?
You do. And let me just relate it to the name of your podcast, because I think it's a brilliant name. So, created in the image of God. This is the underlying theology that helps us understand why receiving grace from God must be passed on. Why the two greatest commandments are love the Lord your God and love your neighbor. You see, look, I've got a phone here. There's probably 10,000 pictures of my family on this phone. And, you know, if one of your viewers or listeners wants to see a picture of my family, fantastic. I'd love to show them. But imagine they were to spit on a picture of my family. At one level, it doesn't matter, right? What harm is done? This is just pixels on a screen. And I'm backed up on the cloud, baby. So, you know, even if you have toxic saliva and you kill my phone, you're not going to touch my photos. But symbolically, what you do to the image of someone is how you feel about that someone. And so how you treat someone made in the image of God is an indicator, not just about how you feel about that other person, but how you feel about the God that they image. And that's why Christianity has never been about close your eyes, pray to Jesus, forget the world around you. No, it's not that. That's Gnosticism, that's Buddhism, that's some kind of Eastern meditation that says, I don't care about this world, I only care about the next world. God says that's unacceptable. How you treat other people made in my image, and you know, news alert, every single human being on this planet is made in the image of God. How we treat them is the indicator of whether we really know and love the God that they image. And so, you know, suddenly the whole of my theological world is being undone. And I've got my 60-year-old friend who's now a foster parent. I've got all the statistics that tell me that if we don't care for children, the vulnerable children in our communities, in our country, then we know what's going to happen. And now the Bible's telling me this is my priority. I didn't have any choice. My wife was right. We needed to welcome children in. And 18 years ago, we started being foster parents. We've had 30 children that we've looked after. Some have stayed for one night. And some have stayed, I mean, the two children that are with us now have been with us 10 years. Our first foster child, we ended up adopting when she was 2 years old, and she's obviously still in our family. So this providing of long-term loving hospitality that loves children who are not biologically connected to you as your own flesh and blood, that we see not just as a civil service, something we do to help our society, but spiritual service, something we want to do out of honor to God.
Well, Krish, what a wonderful joy to learn about your background and how those forces led to so much good. We're going to go to a quick commercial break in which we'll actually see a little video of your work, and that's a nice segue into the next segment. So to the audience, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Krish Kandiah and Hospitality is a Spiritual Practice.
Can you imagine what it's like to have to flee your home, your family and friends and seek safety and sanctuary elsewhere? That's the experience of 43 million children who've had to leave their homes because of war, terror or famine. I believe that art can help people connect and empathize with that experience, so those of us who've never had to lose those things can help other people get the support and welcome that they need. The No Place Like Home art competition is your chance to be part of changing those minds and hearts. We'd love to see your artwork or your poetry. So if you've got pencils or pens or paintbrushes or crayons or charcoal or even a graphic design program, we'd love to see your pieces of art. Or maybe you're better with words. We'd love to see your short poems help people connect with the experiences of refugee children around the world. We're delighted to be working with the British Library and our panel of celebrity and expert judges to find the best piece of artwork in the United Kingdom. And that will be proudly displayed in the British Library during National Refugee Week. You can help change the minds and hearts of our nation and maybe even the rest of the world. So please enter it. We're looking forward to thousands of entries from across the United Kingdom. So good luck, and I look forward to seeing what you produce.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God with Krish Kandiah, recently awarded the Order of the British Empire by King Charles III. Right before the break, we were done talking about his background and coming of age, and now we want to talk about his life's work and how he's translated that into action, not only within his own family, as he described, but in the work that he's doing out there in the world. And we also talked about Matthew 25, and I want to tee up this segment by going a little deeper. My audience knows my pet prophetic theory that the standard of judgment for Matthew chapter 7, by which we will be judged, has been set for the world, right? Matthew has this thread of judgment. Chapter 7, judge not, lest ye be judged. There's a lot of judgment in Christian churches, people sending other people to hell over the tiniest twiggy little doctrinal differences, right? And Jesus says, don't do that. Don't judge another man's servant. But when you do, whatever standard of judgment you set, that is how God will judge you in the judgment, because God is a fair and just judge. You set yourself up as the judge, judging other people by this, that, or the other criteria. Okay, my friend, how are you living up to that in your own life? Or are you a hypocrite, right? So the standard of judgment, I believe, that has been set per Matthew 25, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and the angels with them, he will judge the nations and separate them like a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. I used to think that was a personal thing, and indeed it is for each of us. We all should want to be a sheep, not a goat. But that's really not what the verse is talking about. There are many, many other passages that talk about individual judgment, individual spirituality. Hold fast that which thou hast been given, and let no man take your crown, and all these other things in our spiritual path. And it's in all the religions, by the way, not just Christianity. But this is a statement about how he will judge the nations, and it's my pet prophetic theory that in 1948, when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was established and set by the nations, it eerily seems to parallel those same criteria that Jesus talks about. Are we providing clean water? Are we providing hospital service at a societal level? Are the nations taking care of the vulnerable first and foremost? And the nations will be judged. So, Krish, you and I talked about this only ever so briefly. And when we teed up this show, you were actually in New York doing work with the United Nations. So I thought this would be an interesting concept to tee up this second segment.
Definitely. And it's interesting, Wade. I've not heard that perspective before. I think the Bible holds both individuals and nations and communities accountable. Sorry. So I've got a call. Sorry about that. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can. We can pause briefly and we can edit that out.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So I think the Bible is clear that God does judge us as individuals, but also collectively as well. And some Christians kind of overplay one or the other, that it's only individual, right? That we have no collective responsibility. And so they don't like the idea of structural sins or racial bias, and they have a problem with that collective responsibility. And I want to say, no, the Bible's clear that in Adam, all of us fell, right? So we have a collective responsibility as humanity, and Jesus, as the second Adam, is able to take our place as our collective individual, I guess. He's our representative. So we're very grateful that God doesn't just look at us on our own. He's able to enfold us into the new humanity. But the Bible does give us personal responsibility too. And we are called to play our part in alleviating suffering. I can't say, I don't need to do anything about the poor or the wanderer or the sick or the hungry. That's up to the government to sort that out. I'll just pay my taxes and they can sort that out. I think I still have a responsibility. And so that double whammy of personal and collective, I think we need to hold both in play. And within the church, sometimes people focus only on the individualistic, right? But I need to make sure I don't steal paper clips from the office, or you know, I don't cheat my taxes, or I don't smoke or drink. That's the degree of ethics I'm interested in. I call that micro ethics. And some Christians only focus on the macro ethics. You know, are our societies being kind to the poor? You know, what are we doing in terms of alleviating global poverty? But I think both are always in play together. And so for me, I want to make sure my family are living out Matthew 25. Are we welcoming the hungry? Are we giving space for the stranger? But I'm also really keen to work at a United Nations level to say, how are we as nations caring for the most vulnerable in our society? What kind of reforms might we need in our care system so that we don't use orphanages anymore, but we support families, or we find alternative families? So I think we want to work at both levels. And I think maybe Matthew 25 could speak at that double level as well.
Oh, amen. Absolutely. In fact, when I was, I resigned from the ministry in 1995. To separate my faith from my paycheck. I'm an ex-minister, and but then I was a lay pastor for about a decade, and in pursuing, you know, where I wasn't paid, but I was still preaching in several churches, and I was invited to go to Estonia, where I had previously been a pastor, because like you, I was also interested in the Soviet Union. I actually way back in 1985, was instrumental in bringing a group of 180 worshipers into Poland behind the Iron Curtain.
Wow.
And I actually did end up in Russia. At the time, Gorbachev was abducted on a project with Radio TV Leningrad. It's a whole nother Oprah. But in that sermon in Estonia, I spoke to this Matthew 25 at a personal level. I had not yet realized that it was speaking about the national level. At that time, I was also doing work in India, trying to establish a foundation for homeless children in Chennai. So our paths are, we have so much commonality. It's just really unbelievable. I'm so grateful to have met you, and I want to continue this budding relationship here on this show to talk about how we can work together through the things that we're doing. But during that time in India, I really saw the reason I was in India, by the way, is because unlike you, I was having trouble translating my faith into practical ways in my own backyard because of the litigious nature of America and the regulations, right? It was easy. It was literally easier for me to fly halfway around the world to India and help the poor and homeless than to do so in my own country, where the regulations in society sometimes work against that spiritual Christian heart and the desire to do goodwill, right? You reach out to individuals in America, and the next thing you know, you're entangled in some kind of lawsuit because no good deed goes unpunished, right? And whatever you did is deemed by somebody else. We recently had a situation here. We have a foundation and a property, and we had a situation where someone, frankly, kind of a bad actor, took aim against us, saw the opportunity to maybe get some money by reporting us for this and that, infraction. You follow me? And then those accusations can stick, and you have to defend them when there's absolutely nothing behind them.
Yeah. It's really difficult, Wade. I mean, I've worked quite closely with our government on child protection, and I wish I could tell you every faith group is full of good actors and there are never any bad actors. I mean, we know, looking globally, there are so many instances of people abusing their power, and the church is not somehow separate from that. I mean, full confession, I used to work for Ravi Zacharias. So he was a very famous apologist, but it has since come out that he was exploiting and abusing women in massage parlors that his charity owned, I think in the Chicago area. So, I want to get this balance right. Sometimes Christians are unfairly treated by secular governments that are nervous about our faith. Sometimes that happens. But sometimes Christians are fairly treated by investigations from the government because we have abused our power and privilege. And getting that right is so difficult. I think what I've been trying to do is provide faith literacy to our government, okay, the UK government. So I would run a seminar for maybe 100 social workers, because our government would say, we are short of foster parents. And I'd say, well, I think I could find you hundreds, if not thousands, of Christians that would be willing to do that. But will they be treated fairly in the system?
Right.
And they said, oh, of course they will be. I said, well, let's do some training. So I would sit with 100 social workers, and I would say, look, this is a safe room. You could say whatever you like, right? Our aim is to kind of aim towards truth. We're not trying to judge you. We're not trying to catch you out. And I'll do an exercise. You might like this. I'd give everybody Post-it notes, right? 9 Post-it notes, 3 pink, 3 yellow, 3 blue. And on the 3 pink ones, I say, well, look, again, this is completely, what's the word? It's completely just you and me, right? No one else is going to see what's going on here. It's anonymous. And I want you to write down the first 3 words that come into your mind when you hear the word Christian, okay? And ideally, those are adjectives. So just give me some describing words that show me how you feel about someone who's a Christian. I'm not going to tell you anything else about them, just that they're Christian. All right, and I collect them in. And then I do the same for Muslim. You know, give me 3 adjectives or 3 words that you connect with Islam. Right, collect those in. And then 3 words with atheism, right, an atheist. And then I don't know if you remember, there was this show, Saturday Night Live, that people used to read out the negative tweets they got. I think Barack Obama did it, and he had to have a straight face while people said some pretty terrible things. So I felt like the same. I'm reading the Christian Post-it notes back to a group of 100 social workers. And I have a wall behind me, and I'll say, look, if we think this is a nice comment, a positive comment, we'll put it on this side. If we think it's an ambivalent comment, we'll put it in the middle. And if we think it's a negative comment, we'll put it over here. But you decide as a group. And the first one, do-gooder. Now, what do you think? Is that a nice comment or a bad comment? Everyone agreed it's a bad comment. A do-gooder is someone who's naive and who thinks they're doing good, but actually doing bad. Okay. Bible basher. Okay. Homophobic, negative, right? And by the time we'd finished, probably 70% of the comments were negative, maybe 20% were ambivalent, and 10% were positive. But when I did it with Islam, it was even worse. Suicide bomber, jihadi, terrorist, wife beater, misogynist. It'd be like 90% negative, 5% ambivalent, 5% positive. But with atheists, it was flipped, right? You would get intelligent, rational, compassionate, kind. Anyway, so at the end of this exercise, I say, well, how do you feel about this wall, right? We got all these negative comments related to religion and these positive comments related to atheism. How do you feel? And they're, oh, well, that's just the way it is. And I said, well, imagine we were doing this exercise about another protected category in our equalities legislation. Let's just say I told you the only thing I told you about someone was that they were black, and you had 80% negative comments. What would you call that? Oh, Chris, that would be racist. I said, well, okay, well, what about if I told you they were LGBT and you had 80% negative comments? Oh, that would be homophobic. I said, well, what do you call this then? I've only told you this is a person of faith, and it's not restricted to Islam or Christianity. We could do this with other religions too. Right. We don't have a word for that. That's just the way life is. So I think we can help government undo some of its prejudices, but equally, sometimes we need to help the faith community to speak government, right? We need to translate.
Amen.
And help them navigate that the government isn't always 100% good or 100% bad, that, whether they're red or blue, we can't just demonize them or champion them. We've got to be more nuanced. And sometimes we've got to work out that the questions they're asking us, particularly as foster parents, is not, do you have a right to hold your beliefs? The question is often, are you a safe family for a child to grow up in? And that's the kind of navigation we've got to figure out. Anyway, long story.
No, this is wonderful. So I'm familiar with the DEI activities in the corporate world, right? And you've just described. I mean, I've been to training seminars where I've expected as a manager in the corporate world, because when I left the ministry, I went into the corporate world eventually through education initially. But those exercises are done frequently as you mentioned, with minority groups and protected classes.
Yeah.
And it's exactly like that. You're shown pictures of black, brown, and other, cultural people. And you're expected to give those comments to help you understand your own internal bias.
Yes.
And I love that you've done the same thing with religion. And it is very telling because there's part of the movement that we see in this nation as we go into the election season. You have on our side of the pond in America, you have freedom of religion as a basic foundational tenet in our civilization, our Constitution. But I've also had on this show the president of the Freedom from Religion Society, an atheist who believes that religion is evil, right? Wow. And you've got the four horsemen of the apocalypse in this space, Sam Harris being one of them, and his book, The End of Faith. The militant atheists who have grounds and a reason for arguing that religion is a source of evil in the world. They have a case that they have tried to make, and they do point to some of those things like suicide bombings and whatnot that are happening in the name of religion. And if you did that exercise and you said, well, what do you think of Catholic priests, right? I bet you would get some pretty horrific comments from those who would only focus on the fact that yes, that there are a number of them who have preyed on the most vulnerable in the most horrific way. Right. So you have these so you have these movements in society, and we are trying to figure out. In my travels in India, I was impressed by we have freedom of religion here. But religion has been moved out of society. But in India, there are various and sundry state religions, right? So you have kind of a different way of approaching it, in which you have multiple state religions in India, whereas here religion is pushed out of the state. And I've been intrigued and interested in how these two societies are addressing this issue. And I'm just so grateful to have you on this show I'm learning so much about, you're doing what this show is really about, which is try to integrate faith into community life, the role of religion in society. Jesus said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. But I believe then, as time went on and the Judeo-Christian civilization got rolling, which was what Jesus always intended, to build the kingdom of God, even here on earth, right? That every knee did begin to bow to Jesus, and kings were coronated in his name, and nations became Christian nations with the intent of putting into practice his teachings. And we are still struggling with what does that look like as we lurch forward from ditch to ditch towards, a society which perhaps has too much focus and demands religious obedience to specific doctrines. And then the American experiment that says, no, we're not going to do that here. But the Puritan ethic of what you talked about, the individual effort, we're going to build it from the ground up with people wanting to do good and to serve God. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, right? But what does that look like? And our nation is being torn apart today on that issue. We're moving into an election cycle here in a few days, and each side is vilifying the other as the greatest demonized threat to democracy in the history of the world. So back over to you, Krish.
Well, so much to comment on there, Wade, and this is a fascinating conversation. I'm enjoying our cross-cultural opportunity here. Just on the atheism point, I wrote a book about this, actually. Faiththeism, Why Christians and Atheists Have More in Common Than You Think. Because I don't think it has to be all-out war. Right. I think there are ways that we can have a more nuanced conversation. When I was a cross-cultural missionary working in a predominantly Muslim country, you often look for common ground, like where are the things that you can agree on, and then kind of build out from there. But when it came to the atheist dialogue, you just would get, one YouTube video, 10 reasons why Christians are idiots. And then you'd get one from the Christian, 10 reasons why atheists are idiots. And you go, that doesn't sound like loving your neighbor, right? How can you find some common ground? And I've been on television programs where, we're set up to have a big debate. I'm the Christian and they're the atheist. And I did a bit of research on the guy and I found out that he was super passionate about helping the homeless. And so my opening line is, look, I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing with the homeless. So many people just walk by homeless people as if they don't matter. My world and your world overlap. I'm trying to help children not end up homeless by finding them loving homes. And the guy is like, wait, where's the fight? Like I was ready to fight. We can find some common ground. And with government, I mean, it's very hard for me watching from across the pond, right? What's happening in the US. I'm nervous for how this is going to play out. And one of the reasons I'm nervous is if it looks like the church belongs to one political party, that the church is somehow a puppet of a political party, we lose a hearing from the other side, right? I don't know. In the UK, our supermarkets do not pick a political side, right? You don't go down to the grocery store and it says, no, only, conservatives allowed in here, or only progressives allowed in here. The supermarket realizes they are here for everybody. And, if you lose that ability of being there for everybody, you're losing half your audience at least. So if it looks like the church is saying, look, we are only backing this party because we only care about, I don't know, these three issues, I think you're losing a hearing from the other side. My approach is a little bit like Daniel in the Bible. Like Daniel did not choose to serve King Nebuchadnezzar, right? He was forcibly removed from his country, right? He was basically trafficked out by the government and forced to study at the equivalent of the University of Babylon. And he was studying kind of to be in the civil service. Let's try and kind of map this out today. And there were certain things he said, you know what, I'm not going to fight, right? They changed his name, they changed his clothing, but on some things he said, I'm drawing a line here. You're not going to have my heart by kind of feeding me this lush food. I'm gonna draw a line. And then he enters the civil service. And if you listen to him speak about King Nebuchadnezzar, there's this bit in Daniel where Daniel was given, the king has a terrible dream that he's going to turn into some kind of wild animal, right? And he can't understand what's going on. And Daniel goes, oh, king, may you live forever. I wish this prophecy were for another king. You go, wait, why would you want it to be for another king? This is the guy that forced you to move out of your country. He's killed millions of, or maybe thousands of people in Jerusalem. Why would you want this prophecy to be for another? So he's an incredible diplomat, right? And he's serving in a government he doesn't agree with, but he's still trying to do good. And I go, Jeremiah said something similar. Jeremiah 29, he says, you're to seek the welfare of the city that I'm sending you. You go, wait. We're in Babylon. That's the epitome of evil, right? Makes Sin City, Las Vegas look pale in consideration.
There's that great there's that great psalm. Could we sing the eternal songs by the waters of Babylon?
Yes. And the temptation would have been, let's withdraw from the world, right? Let's set up our little camp and let's try to stay as distinct and different from the Babylonians as possible. But God says, no, I want you to seek the welfare of that city. They're not your people. They're not Jewish. I want you to be a blessing in Babylon. I'm going, wow. None of the two political options that could lead to the future of the US government are anywhere as bad as King Nebuchadnezzar. Whatever your feelings about Democrats or Republicans, none of them are in the same scale as King Nebuchadnezzar. And yet our calling is to be a blessing. And so for me, I've worked with and for governments I don't agree with here in the UK, because we've found, even though we might not agree on a big political project, we've agreed that caring for vulnerable children is both a government responsibility and the church's responsibility. So I'm going to find some common ground. I'm going to work there. You okay?
That's just fascinating, Krish. And I wanted to, you shared that book. I'm going to quickly hold up this one here. This is a book I've written, The Hardness of the Heart. It's about the fact that God hates divorce. And I personally went through one, and working through from the biblical perspective, what it is that Jesus meant when he said, about the hardness of the heart. It's Jesus, you know the story, Jesus being confronted, and, Moses said we could get divorced. What do you say? Well, Moses allowed it because of the hardness of the heart, but from the beginning, it was not so. So going back to the beginning, going back to the book of Genesis, trying to find out what human relations should be like. What is the relationship between a man and a woman really supposed to be? What did I do wrong? How should I structure my life differently? But there's a similar thread. When I was leaving the ministry and I went into the corporate world, I modeled my path after Daniel.
Wow.
Right? In the corporate world here in corporate America, I used the story of Daniel for me to navigate the same situation. So the similarities between our paths just continue. And so we're running out of time right now. Can you go a little longer? We've only booked a certain amount of time.
Sure. I've got another 10. Would that be okay?
Okay, that's perfect. So we're going to go to a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll do the final segment here with Dr. Krish Kandiah and wrap up this recording. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the Royal Falcon Foundation. Our curriculum and activities inspire and train adolescents through hands-on experiences, fostering growth and empowerment. Through immersive and challenging experiences, we shape young minds to think independently and develop their leadership skills. Our programs foster new friendships and unity, shaping young leaders to tackle real-world challenges with confidence. We believe in equipping the next generation with the skills to become leaders of tomorrow. Join us at the Royal Falcon Foundation and be part of a journey that empowers, unites, and inspires. Visit our website and embrace a world of possibilities today. RoyalFalconFoundation.org.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God with Krish Kandiah OBE from the other side of the pond. We're talking, all things all over the world now. We're going back to Babylon and the Jews in Babylon and how they were required to be good in that society. And we're relating that to the American election that's coming up, and how each side is claiming the other side is going to destroy democracy. And I hope that you and the audience are getting even half as much as I am out of this discussion and this dialogue. There's this one other little tangent I got to go on real quick. Behind you, I see Tracy Chapman. I see REM. Is that Wilco up there on the?
Oh, it's the Killers.
The Killers. Fuse. Yes.
Yeah. Tracy Chapman, Whitney Houston, and REM. There you go.
Yeah. I have Fish behind me on the wall, but when I started the show, I had the Beatles' Let It Be up there behind me.
Oh, lovely.
So in my books, I weave in music as a sort of universal language, right? Music is a universal language that reaches out to people. So let's give a little context. So maybe share some examples here about the feedback you're getting from the world as you go about how is this working out for you? Obviously, you've had success in working within governments and within institutions to thread the needle, to walk the straight and narrow, to walk, as I call it, the razor's edge between these opposing forces, and to be a force of integration in society, even as others seem to want to divide and conquer through forces of disintegration. How is that working out for you?
Well, there have been lots of encouragements. Let me share a little bit more. So, my family became a fostering and adopting family. I then started a charity to try and call the church forward into that space. When we did the math, we worked out in the UK there was about 5,000 children waiting for adoption, and there was a shortage of about 9,000 foster families. And I was part of a network of churches, evangelical churches, at least 20,000 of those. So we did the math. We just needed one new family per church to step forward for fostering or adoption. The rest of the church to wrap around them like an extended family of aunties and uncles, cheering them on. And the church alone could meet the entire need. And it didn't involve each of us adopting 20 children, right? It was just one new family per church. The stats actually work out exactly the same in the US and in Canada, and you don't need to adopt from overseas. We can work on helping other countries to adopt their own children with their own support in the same cultural context. And a lot of those children in other countries actually have living parents. It's poverty that's driven them into orphanages and some of the circumstances that you and I have shared about. So that was my job. I thought, right, that's the focus. We're just going to help vulnerable children. And then you might remember there was that terrible incident on Bodrum Beach in Turkey when a little boy, a 3-year-old boy called Alan Kurdi, washed up on the beach. He had a red t-shirt and blue trousers, and he was a Syrian refugee whose family had tried to make a crossing across the Black Sea, and they ended up not the Black Sea, they crossed over the ocean and they died. And suddenly something changed in the British culture. Everyone was saying, oh, we've got to do something, we've got to do something. And we worked out that our government was willing to take 20,000 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children over 5 years. And I'm going, we already don't have enough foster parents, so where are these children going to go? We don't want to put them in orphanages. That's not going to be good. So we started a campaign, and campaign is an overstatement. We just had a little picture and a web form, and it said, if you'd be willing to help unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, the best thing you could do is start the process to be trained and assessed as a foster parent, and then we'll be ready. And we thought we'd get 100 responses. We had 100 in an hour. This is a Friday night at 9 o'clock. Terrible time to launch a social media campaign. Saturday morning it was 1,500. Sunday morning it was 3,000. Monday morning it was 8,000. Now 8,000 people willing to become foster parents is a politically significant number. I get a call from our State Department or the Home Office. Can you come in? We want to talk to you. I'm always a guy, early bird catches the worm. So I'm there half an hour before the meeting. So I'm the first one in the room. I've got the best seat in the house. And my charity's tiny, right? It's me, my wife, a laptop, and an administrator. and I'm sat next to the head of Save the Children, the Red Cross, and they can't believe the statistics. And I'm going, well, the church, this is what we do, right? We want to love God and love our neighbors. And so here's a really practical thing we could do. And that was part of the eye-opener that we, the church, have got something to offer any government. The government often has all the responsibility for vulnerable people, but no levers to pull. They've got money maybe, but not manpower. And we, the church, can be a mobilizable force for good. And some people say, oh, that's not right. You know, the government's just going to come to you when they want to save money. I say, look, I don't care. If it gives us the opportunity to care for the vulnerable in the way that James 1:27 tells us, then we should do it. And we should find the way. This is the way that we can bless the city that we're in. And this same methodology I've seen happen in refugee resettlement too. One last story, and then I'll let you on, Wade. You may remember 24th of February, it'll be 3 years in this coming February, that Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine happened. And the world watched, unbelievable that this was happening. You know, this is a democracy. This is a country where the kids watch the same TV shows as ours. There was a picture of a little girl singing the theme song from Frozen in a bunker while the bombs are dropping, and we're all thinking, this could be my daughter. My daughter likes Frozen. How is this happening? And our government in the UK didn't have any plan. What are we going to do? And I'd been to Moldova, and I'd seen a tiny country offer hospitality to tens of thousands of Ukrainians. So we set up a website where members of the public could pledge that they'd be willing to welcome Ukrainian mothers and children into their homes. There's no government scheme. I said, look, maybe if enough of us do this, we could persuade the government to do something. 29,000 people pledged. And that meant the government was willing to welcome us as a faith-based charity in to help them co-design the Homes for Ukraine program. There's now 200,000 Ukrainians in the country, and the church played a catalytic role in opening up that hospitality at a time when our government was pretty against immigration. So I really believe whoever wins your election, I'm praying, for good things for your country, that there will still be opportunities for the church to live out the gospel whichever way it goes, red or blue.
Amen. Krish, it's been an absolute honor to have you on the show today. I want to reference one more thread of commonality here. I mentioned that I was actually in Leningrad at that time when tanks were coming from Moscow and I was coming in from Finland.
Yeah.
At that moment when Gorbachev had been abducted to the Dachau down on the Black Sea. And because of that proximity, and I had a visa to go to the Ukraine, I ended up returning to the US right before that. I was stationed in Germany for over 10 years as a minister doing various things. And then I mentioned Estonia and whatnot. But I was very aware of how during the collapse of the Soviet Union, and I'm also, all this stuff is swirling in my head because of the inputs that you're giving me into my worldview here. You know, there's that song by Police and Sting,
Yes.
The Russians love their children too, right?
Yeah.
Well, you know, they're all different sides of this, and that is that when the Soviet Union collapsed, one of the things that happened was Ukraine was the number 3 nuclear power on the planet, and they voluntarily gave up the nukes that were on their soil, which they had control of, as part of the strategic, you know, the ongoing nature of the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, which, by the way, has, in my view, other prophetic significance of the nations beating their swords into plowshares and reaching agreement to reduce armaments. So you have the micro and the macro level, and the God who created time and space and sits outside it has written history in advance in the form of prophecy from the perspective of being outside of time and space. So now you have this nuclear power, and they voluntarily gave up their nukes in exchange for a promise from the United States, your country, Great Britain, and Russia to honor their sovereignty. So at the macro level, you have the violation of those international treaties and standards leading to this crisis. You have all these issues, and you have this isolationist movement in the United States now. We're part of the nation, and it's interesting how the political sides and people's views flip-flop based on this division, right? Where those who traditionally might have been more eager to, you know, go and protect Ukraine are saying, well, America first, and we don't want to have any involvement there. We don't have a responsibility. We don't want America to be the policeman of the world. And it's a complicated mess of situation, but the sides need to come together and consult. They need to stop demonizing each other. They need, you know, when God tried to woo Israel back, he said, come, let us reason together, right? You know the verse, right? I will take you out into the wilderness and I will speak to you tenderly. Come, let us reason together. I'm getting teary-eyed now thinking about your work, the work you're doing, the good impact you are having at the micro and the intermediate and the macro level. All these things you know, hopefully the audience is gaining a lot, as I am, from this. Any parting words here that you'd like to leave the audience with before we wrap up for today?
Wait, I just want to say I'm grateful that you're calling different audiences together. You're trying to model something of this peacemaking. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they'll be known as the children of God. And I'm, you know, very passionate about children, and you know, adoption's a really interesting metaphor, not just of, you know, what family formation can look like, but actually our relationship with God. In the Bible, it's really clear Jesus is the only eternal Son of God. He's an eternal Son of God by right. The rest of us get to be children of God through adoption.
Absolutely, we've been adopted by the Father.
Right. I only get to say our Father who art in heaven because of adoption, right? That's the only reason I get that right. It's incredible. It's an amazing gift. Well, my adopted daughter has no biological connection to me or my wife, and yet people still say she looks like us. She doesn't look like us. She's just caught some of our mannerisms, right? She tells a joke with her hands like I tell my jokes with my hands, and she's got a big smile that she's caught from my wife. There's something about her nurture that has shaped the way she presents to the world. Now, what is the family likeness that is going to make people know that we're the children of God? It's if we're peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they'll be known as the children of God. So this is our heritage. This is our family business. This is our family likeness. And I want to just call all my sisters and brothers that listen to your story in a time of incredible polarization in the United States that has a ripple effect around the world. Can I just call you to live into the family likeness, be peacemakers, like Jesus, the Prince of Peace? That doesn't mean compromise. It doesn't mean selling your faith. It means because of your faith, you're going to refuse to demonize. You're going to look for some common ground. You're going to bless your neighbor. You're going to love them as your own flesh and blood, because this is how we'll stand out. And so I know it's a difficult time in your nation, but I'm just praying for many, many peacemakers to model the likeness of Jesus and our Father to the nation.
Well, thank you so much for being with us here today. We're going to now go to a quick commercial break. And when we come back, quick reveal here, this was a pre-recorded show given the time difference between here and the UK. We should have time still to interact with a few of the audience comments when we come back. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And Dr. Kandiah, thank you so much. I do hope we can have you back on the show again soon, perhaps after the election, and continue this conversation. There's so much more to be unpacked here.
Thanks. God bless. Bye.
Bye. We'll be right back.
What do divorce, kidnapping, ancient prophecies, and the collapse of the Soviet Union have in common with the music of the Beatles? These are all elements of author Wade Franson's traumatic autobiographical journey, recorded in his best-selling book, The People of the Sign. He effortlessly weaves these elements together, proving once and for all that truth really is far, far stranger than fiction. Order your copy now on Amazon or by emailing orders@soupllc.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to the live segment following up on the pre-recorded show with Dr. Krish Kandiah. I sincerely do hope that you enjoyed the conversation with him as much as I did. It's always interesting to sit and watch something that you're featured in, recorded. I do wish certainly that we would have heard more from him during that time. And I probably should have commented on his very heartfelt and heartwarming prayers for us here in the United States at the end of his presentation, asking us to become peacemakers and thereby lay claim to the adopted status that we have as children of God. He did invoke that scripture, and it was wonderful. To my Baha'i friends out in Clearwater and elsewhere as well, we certainly can take that to heart. It's certainly not just Christians, it's those from every religion who need to emulate the forces of integration. And I would love to share a couple of the comments here from the audience. I don't know that that's particularly relevant, though, here at the end without Dr. Kandiah in the studio. But thank you to those who are participating in the audience. If you're still out there and you have any specific questions and you want to throw them out there and get them discussed now, certainly do so. And I will engage with them. But as we wrap up the show, we're already slightly over time. We do have one item left, and that is the sneak peek for next week's show. And as you might imagine, since this is a Tuesday night and 7 days from now, it's November 5th, the next show that we'll do will actually be on election night. And we have a very special guest with a very special topic. And I'll share that with you now to wrap up tonight's show. And wish you all God's blessings. Continue to be forces of integration, even as forces of disintegration seek to tear this nation and the world apart. We don't really need revolution. We need evolution in a positive way towards the kingdom of God and to live a godly and just existence. So thank you for tuning in to this show. We will have Dr. Kandiah back on in the future. And here's the sneak peek for next episode. We'll see you all there next week. Good evening, everyone. This is your host, Wade Franson, created in the image of God, the role of religion in society. I'm here with my friend, philosopher Daniel Sanderson, founder of Planksip. And tonight we're going to be talking about his new book and answering the question, how would Plato vote? Welcome to the studio, Dan.
Oh, thank you, Wade, for having me.
So how long have you been working on this book? And of course, your whole life, right? But specifically.
Yeah, so I originally thought 10 years, but I think hard, head down for two solid full years of putting it all together. And yeah, it's been great.
And your book is Reimagining Plato, and you worked with Dr. Martine Diepenbrook to get this tome together. Is it a tome or what is it?
It's essentially a reference book. I had spent hours and hours and hours going through Plato's dialogues, and most academics or people who are reading Plato's dialogues just can only do it once or twice a lifetime. And so what this does is it lets the reader look up things. It's a reference book to certain arguments and what the academic community has spent so much time researching and what they have to say about the book. So that's essentially what it is.
But for the modern enlightened man, I understand it also makes them accessible and relevant.
That's right. I mean, when you think about it, you quite often don't know the depth of what you're reading, and I think this happens in a lot of sacred texts.
So you consider Plato to be a sacred text? Well,
certainly, yeah, I do.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So now we're talking tonight, well, we're the sneak peek, but we will be talking on election night. And Plato wrote something called what, the Republic?
Yes, he did.
And thus the title of the show, How Would Plato Vote? We want to look at our republic here in America. And of course, you're hailing from Canada, which is where I was born. So we have a degree of detachment, hopefully, from the current madness of the American election for 2024. But it's polarizing and dividing this country. So, Christians and conservatives often ask the question, how would Jesus vote? And we're asking, how would Plato vote? We're going to dive into that. I'm not asking you to answer it today, but what can viewers expect for episode 1, 2, 3 on November 5th, election night? Why should they tune in here instead of the election itself?
I think viewers need to really understand, if they're using and they're viewing this through the lens of Plato, he really had a hard time with democracies. And rather than picking sides, I think understanding why he thought democracies were a challenge. Now, it's not a pure democracy that the vote is going to determine, but it's the level of chaos associated with an overly democratic party or society. So that's the little tidbit that I hope to throw out to the audience, and hopefully it tweaks the interest.
Well, and we're also going to be covering questions like, how would Jesus vote? How would a Christian vote? How would a Baha'i vote? Maybe even how would a Muslim vote? Looking at other sacred texts and analyzing this decision. I personally believe that it's a sacred duty to vote. At one time in my past, it was literally against my religion. How would Jesus vote? He wouldn't. He said, my kingdom is not of this world. I'll unpack that and more, and we'll talk about all of this, helping you perhaps get over your election hangover for when you vote for or didn't vote for the person who won, and how you feel about it the next day. This may give you a different lens to look at that question. You don't want to miss episode 1, 2, 3, election night, November 5th, 8 p.m. Central Time, created in the image of God, the role of religion.